Hello and welcome to Hare in the Hawthorn. My name's Kate Ray and this evening I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I know you've seen me once before talk about my experiences with the Fae, but one of the questions that I do get asked on a regular basis is, in terms of books, what do I read? So I'm just going to be doing a series, just a 10-minute talk about books that I've come across, things that I've found useful, maybe books to avoid in the future, maybe books that I haven't found that useful. To be quite honest, the books that I have picked up along the way have all had something in them that have revealed themselves. This particular book that I've chosen today, I've chosen it for the reason that it's not something that I would have picked up off a bookshelf myself if it hadn't have been recommended. And it was recommended through a group that I'm on Facebook, and I thought, well, if these guys know about it and it's something that's of interest to them, then it's got to be something that's an interest to me. So the book that I'm going to be looking at is The Fairy Bible. Now, to start with, I'm a bit of a book snob. It has two covers, if I remember rightly, and this first cover that comes on this book is not something that would have ever have drawn me in to say that it was a book of any kind of quality, I'm afraid to say. It's quite a small book, but quite thick. And again, it feels good quality, but it feels a bit like it doesn't quite know what it should be by the front cover. It's got lots of pictures of different fairies, elementals, different spirits, which gives you an idea of what it's about. The title's very much there. It looks like a field guide, maybe, something that you would get. I've been buying lots of foraging books at the minute, so it very much feels like that kind of foraging book field guide, which I suppose is good, but I like a beautiful looking book. And in reviews that are coming up, I will show you what I mean by beautiful looking books, because there are many out there. But as the saying goes, don't judge a book by a cover. So this was recommended. It's The Fairy Bible by Teresa Moorey. And again, like I said, if I walked into a bookshop, this is not something that I'd have picked up on off the shelf and bought. I don't even think I would have picked it up off the shelf and looked at it in any great detail. So it's $12.99 recommended retail price. I think I probably got it a little bit under from a well-known online store that sells books. I'm not promoting anybody here. So inside the book, again, I'm not over enamoured. The pictures aren't really great. It seems a bit haphazard in its imagery, and I'll flick through and show you some of those shortly. So what does the book contain? Again, it doesn't sound that exciting. If you want a book on fairies, you know, it's very basically broken down. So it's broken down into an introduction, talks about the realm of the fairies, it talks about the elemental fairies, water, air, fire and earth. It has hearth and house fairies. It has flower fairies, tree fairies, weather fairies, a dictionary of fairies at the back, and a select bibliography. Now, again, I might be sounding really down on this book, and when I got it, I was flicking through that first content page a little bit disappointed how it was broken down, but actually how it's broken down works really well. As a quick guide reference to the different fae, this is something that you can go through and choose those sections to look in. Now, this is where this book gets really good, really, really good. So I read the introduction, and the introduction was obviously somebody who very much knows what they're talking about. It was very knowledgeable. It talks about historic fairy folklore. It talks about fairy tales. It talks about encounters. You know, the famous Cottonley fairies, and these are only like maybe 1 or 2 pages on each of these things, but it's so well written and so detailed. As a starting point, it's brilliant. So when we get into each of these chapters, each of these headings, I was really quite pleasantly surprised about the breadth that's packed into this book. So I'll give you an example here. I'll just flick through. So the next section is the realm of the fairies, which talks about different cities, different cultures, fairy food, fairy magic, fairy festivals. It talks about the pagan festivals and where fae fit in with that, and things that you can do within that. And again, really knowledgeable stuff. It's not something that you would possibly buy you know, a child. Well, it is quite complex in introduction, really, which is nice. And we go into things like tree fairies. So on most pages there are little illustrations. There's an introduction to each of the sections and then an illustration, and it talks about flowers and plants and how they relate, animals, how they relate to fae. So let me take you to a section on, let's do air fairies. So each section is given a double page spread just to denote where it is and mark where it is. And I'll give you a brief overview of some of the characters that are in here, and some of these I've never even heard of, and again the referencing is fantastic. So it talks through the element of air first, and it gives you a brief introduction to what the element of air is. It also talks about things like the association, so the association with thought, communication, ideas, movement, etc. So again, as a starting point, it's really very, very clever. And then we get characters that are fae within that realm. And it's not just fae. So there are links to religious figures. There are links. I mean, one of the things that shocked me that I'd never really come across is on this page here. I don't know whether you can see it very well. So we've got, I know this is mirrored, but it says Odin the All-Father. So Odin's included in there, and it explains why he has connection to the fae, which is brilliant. And it's got the Valkyries in there, it's got Hermes in there. So it's all those connectives as well as just straightforward sort of famous sort of fairy names within there. And this doesn't just stay specifically within European culture, although it is heavily within in that, as most sort of fairy writing within Europe is. It goes into the Mediterranean. We go over to Egypt, looking at fae. We go into looking at jinn, which are from the Middle East. It talks about you know, fairies from Ireland, England, Scotland. It talks about Scandinavian countries, and each being, so we've got one here of the knockers, which are elemental beings that dwell within caves, and it has around about 2 pages, but these pages are absolutely packed with information. So it's information on sort of where you can find them, what kind of characteristics they have, what they may look like, how they may turn up and show themselves to you. Usually it will suggest where its origins are from as well. So these 2 little pages are absolutely packed full and solid of information. I particularly like, there is a section at the back which talks about, so each of the sections at the back of each chapter will talk about how to interact with these particular elements, with these particular beings. It will give you ways that you can create space for them. It will also give you ways to protect yourself from them. It will give you spells and rituals that you can do, and also maybe food that they would like. So it gives you that opportunity to bring fairy well within your life, and how to do that in a very practical way. Again, these are only sort of one very short page, very easy to follow, but obviously very, very knowledgeable. And I think that that's just a really lovely element to this book. Again, I'm flicking through, and the imagery is not one that would have particularly drawn me to this book at all. I'm quite a visual person. I like beautifully visual books, But this is not doing this book any justice, if you like, but it's a gem, and it's one of those real hidden gems. In it again, we've got things like meditation, how to sit down and meditate with the fairies. It's just absolutely jam-packed. Right at the very back, we have a dictionary of fairies, so it will give you it gives you sort of continents and what fairies come from those continents. That's the first thing. So we have Central Europe, Chinese, French, German, references Hawaii, India, Jewish, Persian, Russian, Scottish, Scandinavian, Spanish and Turkish. And then right at the very, very back, we have a select bibliography. So this is obviously where the writer, the author, has taken some inspiration from and taking some of that knowledge base from. So we have reference to A Dictionary of Fairies by Catherine Briggs, which was a Penguin book in 1977. We have Enchantment of the Fairy Realm by Ted Andrews, which is 2005's book. I think I've got that on my shelf and I will be reviewing it. We've got Fairy Oracle by Brian Froud. Now I'm going to do a whole shebang about Brian Froud. I am a huge fan, and I have a stack of his books and lots of sort of post-dated fairy books, if you like. And yeah, we'll do a real big Froud. That's going to be like a good half an hour to an hour to go through those. We've got Fairy Magic by Rosemary Ellen. And we've got The Secret Lives of Elves, Fauns from the Private Journal of Reverend Robert Kirk, which again is another one that I have on my bookshelf, and I find that incredibly intriguing and an incredible source of information. So all in all, for a book that I would not have even contemplated flicking through and would have sort of passed by, even I vaguely remember the other cover to one of the reprints, even that wouldn't have drawn me in to wanting the Fairy Bible. However, an absolute must-have on your shelf. This is like now my first port of call. So if somebody comes to me with an issue of the Fae, they're having difficulty with the Fae, or they're just interested in it but want to know, say, what realm fairies come from, etc. This is my first port of call, and it's almost like a really good index to where to go next, and it will give me some clearer ideas of how to work with the Fae and move on to more complex books that are out there, more complex knowledge and the people to ask. So Fairy Bible, yeah, it sums it up. That's what it is. It is a Fairy Bible. It has become a firm favourite on my bookshelf, and yeah, it's a good one. I definitely recommend as a starting point and as something that you will go back to time and time again, and as a great starter reference. It's a gem, an absolute gem. I love it. So there we go. That's the Fairy Bible with Teresa Moorey. Hope you enjoyed that. I will be coming back. Like I say, there's going to be a real big one about the books by Brian Froud, the artwork by Brian Froud, and also his wife Wendy. I've got many books to review, and with a lot of knowledge in them and recommendations, but this is my very first recommendation for you. Thank you very much for watching.